Welcome to our show tonight. I'm James Err. Last evening, Kalamazoo was witness to yet another homicide under pretty much the same circumstances as those preceding it, which is why we're broadcasting this program this evening. We will be addressing this most relevant topic for the next 2 hours. At this time, we'll have our guests introduce themselves and relate their stories.
My name's Gerald Inama. This is my wife, Deborah. Our 21-year-old daughter, Beth, and a co-worker, Doug Kramer, 21 also, were both shot and killed December 20th, 1994 at Video Watch in Kalamazoo. All I can say is that my wife and I are living a parent's worst nightmare. There are just too many things to try to say to really relay what it is we actually feel, except it's something we can't change. It's something we did not cause. It's something our daughter never deserved. Our daughter was an asset to this community, and we'll never know how far she could have helped others, because someone else felt they needed to settle a score or make a statement.
My name is Jesse Owen. My son Dentaire was murdered May the 24th, 1993 at the Bachelor 14. And it's been hard since he passed. And I'm so full now I can't talk.
My name is Alberta Moore. My son Liddell Moore was murdered August the 9th, 1996, and that's just a few weeks ago. And it's really hard to talk about it, but it's also hard to take all the stuff that people are saying about it. You know, nobody have a perfect child. Nobody at all have a perfect child. Every once in a while, your child get caught up in the street, but that don't mean it's all your fault at all. That's why I'm here to, you know, my child wasn't as bad at all the time. But, you know, the paper might make it seem like the children's is really bad, but our children's is not so bad. They all get mixed up one time in their life. That's why we're here to try to stop all this stuff. It's really hard. They've been too long, you know. But it's really hard.
My name is Lee Shepard. My son, Cervantes Gill, was murdered outside of Hardy Hamburger on December the 10th, 1994. And since that time, to try to put into words in a few moments or even a couple of hours what our family has gone through, the devastation that it has caused, there's no words to even say what it does to your family. I just live every day trying to get through, just trying to get through. Some days are easier than others. In the very beginning, it was just, I just didn't even believe that I was going to live. I said, there's no way that I would be here to put my son in the ground, because that is not something that you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to watch your children be buried, especially when it's at the hands of someone else. No one should have even the desire in their heart to say who should live and who should die. Whatever he did, whatever Miss Owen's son or her son or even the Anamas, their child didn't do anything but be at work. But whatever they could have done or didn't do, it could have been made right without having to take their life. You know, I always say, people say, well, what would you say if you saw the person that killed your son, I would want to know, what could my son have taken from you that me and all of whatever could not have given back? If my son could not have repaid the debt, I would have repaid the debt. There was nothing that he could have taken from you or said to you that could make you angry enough to take someone's life, you know. And so my husband said, well, I want you to speak because it was my stepson. And I said, well, you know, stepson or whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. That was our child, and we loved him, and there's nothing that we can do to bring him back, but maybe someone out there might hear something that was said tonight that will let them know that this is not the answer, that this killing, senseless killing, has to stop.
Well, is it possible at this time we can open the floor up for questions and open the phone lines up for maybe questions? A lot of people, viewers, are calling in.
Something's got to be done now. There's no way that we can continue as a race of people and allow our children to continue to kill themselves or to kill others. So I think this is a beautiful thing and a step in the right direction of changing our attitudes. And it should not be about one's past. It should be about one's presence in the future that one may be able to give to another. So you people, families, are definitely to be commended. And all I can say is may God's strength and blessings be with you.
One thing that I have seen through all of this, and just looking at the state of our world, and there's nothing we can do about that except for our own little community, but it just seems to me the value of a life is gone from where it used to be 100 years ago, 50 years ago. The value of a life isn't what it used to be. We had a chance to talk to the national chairman of Parents of Murdered Children back in May, and I hope she'll forgive me, but I can't remember her name, but she explained a situation that really made somebody take up a notice, and I'll explain it to you, maybe you can get the parallel. But she went over her son's house one day, and the son had a little toy gun, and he was playing with the gun. And she said to her son, how could you let him do that, knowing what it is I do for a living, that I try to help people who have lost children to violent crime? And he said, Mom, he's just playing. Well, the woman happened to have a friend who was a nurse. So she borrowed from her a rubber hose and a plastic syringe, and next time she went over her son's house, she says, here, tomorrow, let him play junkie. And since that day, there's never been any toy guns in the house. But it's just the idea. Murder seems to be okay, because no matter where you turn in a magazine or a newspaper or TV or a movie, it's there. And it's accepted by the general public, just like it was probably for most of us till it happened to us, as an everyday thing that happens to somebody else. But I think we can all testify to the fact that it can happen to anybody. And I don't say that to try to scare people, but it can happen to anybody.
Well, I think that it was, when you're talking about the media, there were things that were reported the very first day after my son's death that tried to shine a light into what was supposedly his dark side. Well, he didn't have a dark side. He was a 19-year-old boy. He was a person that had a lot of friends, and all the time you and your friends don't do everything that is supposedly right. I didn't do everything that my mother wanted me to do, but that did not make me be worthy of murder, of killing someone or either being killed. And it's the same thing with my son, and I think I understand what Mrs. Moore is saying. I have not read all that was in the paper, but I have heard some of the things. And being that whatever her son did or did not do, it did not merit him being shot down in front of his mother's house. So that is one of the things that we as parents, you get tired of people saying, well, he was doing this and he was doing that and he had a beeper. And well, there's a lot of people that carry beepers, and there's a lot of people that do a lot of things that they should not do. And if that person's life is taken, then you should not focus on what he was doing. If he wasn't doing anything to harm the person that killed him, then why should his life have been taken? It was not self-defense that any of our sons and their daughter was killed. It was not self-defense. So therefore, that person did not have a justifiable reason.
Sure.
Good evening. You've talked a little bit about what you think needs to be changed in the media, and that's very eloquent. I'm wondering if you would reflect on what could happen in our community. Some of you have had more time than others to think about that, in terms of things that could be different in our community, that some of us who would like to be more involved in the community could do or band together to do here to make the tone or the climate that you're discussing be a little different.
You know, where I live on Hayes Park, and what I see, you know, like it's some of these abandoned houses they got, and I see some of the kids, little kids, you know, playing in the streets. And maybe if they don't want to fix them houses up and give them to somebody to live in, maybe they can tear them down and make a playground for the kids, or do something, or bring in we don't have a skating ring here on the north side. We don't have a computer center right here where kids can get to. I think maybe if they can do something like that, it'll make better for the community. That is what I wish they can do for the community, to help, you know. I can't save my son, but maybe I can help somebody else's kid get off the street, whatever, you know?
I think that one of the things that our community needs to look at, and this is coming from a standpoint of it almost being 2 years since Beth was murdered, is to take a look at the people that are coming in with these smaller crimes, and they're being excused and excused and excused over and over again. Defense attorneys weave these stories about what it could have been when you know that that's not what it was. And it's excusing this behavior, whether it's shoplifting or stealing a car or whatever. It tends to escalate. It has escalated. I feel that people should be held accountable for their crimes. Truth in sentencing, meaning that people should serve the time that is given to them at a time of a trial. I think that has a lot to do with the escalation of crimes. I've sat for many nights and thought, how could somebody do that? How could somebody walk up and shoot someone, an innocent person? In our daughter's case, not even anything having to do with her. She was there. That was it. 21 years old, and somebody could walk in and shoot her in the face. And you just think, why? Why?
And another thing, a lot of parents don't have the Lord in their home, and the kids don't really know what to do, so they just go out and do the wrong thing. I think if they put the Lord in their home, that it would be a better world.
To me, it's not so much of that there. What it is that there's too much outside influence from the home that tends to turn some kids, regardless of their race, religion, nationality, just tends to turn some kids a different way because they're convinced that, yeah, I can do it an easier way, I can take that shortcut.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is once a person, we've all had that happen to us where a point in our life came, we had to make a decision which way we were going to go, what path we were going to take. And if you take the wrong choice, then it makes it easier to take that choice again, and once you get so far down that road, you can't turn back anymore. And that's where I see the community has to step in, is to try to prevent that first bad choice from being made, whether it be through church, through school, through parents getting together in a community and say, what can we do for our kids?
I think one of the main things that I know from our standpoint, our neighbors are friends, and our kids went to private school. They think it's not their problem. They think it's a problem that doesn't affect them. And I'm here to say that it absolutely affects them. And they can sit in their nice homes in their nice neighborhoods. We live in a nice home in a nice neighborhood, send our children to private school, and our daughter is just as dead as if she were on the north side. And so I really believe that people need to stop thinking that they're insulated from this, because they're not. They're not. In one evening, in the time it took for somebody to pull the trigger, our entire life has changed so dramatically that it is not even able to be expressed. It is not something that people like to think about. When you try to talk to them about this is happening in our community, it's like their eyes glaze over and they say, oh, do we have to talk about this again? And yeah, we have to talk about it again, because on December 21st it was my daughter, and it could be anyone's daughter or son. And I really feel that people all over Kalamazoo have to, and Portage and the surrounding areas have to address these problems and realize that it's their problem too, and not just isolated areas and areas that they feel are not good neighborhoods or whatever. I think they need to acknowledge that if their children go to the movies, if they work out, if they're outside the home working, if they're just out at the mall, they're still affected by what's going on, the people carrying weapons, and it's a big problem in Kalamazoo.
No, I'm not one that puts a lot of emphasis on what is being shown on the television, because I don't think there's anybody in this room that grew up in an area, in a neighborhood, any worse than where I grew up. You know, they don't even show on television, except for when you see, like, maybe New York Undercover. Kalamazoo doesn't even have a neighborhood that looks like what I grew up in the 60s, because I'm a product of concrete jungle. I come from Chicago. I lived in Chicago all of my life, and I know all about all of the murder and the rapes, and there are things that I saw and heard even before I was a woman, before I was an adult, that people in Kalamazoo still have not even heard of, even yet. And my children did not grow up as little thugs or thieves or whatever. We didn't have the privilege of sending them to private school, but we grew up in almost a fantasy land neighborhood. They did. And we moved from Chicago because as the time became really bad in the late 80s, we moved from there because it began to get into our community, into our neighborhood. We lived on the south side of Chicago, and it was really, really nice. But when it began to filter in the drugs and the bad neighborhoods and things, and people from other areas were able to buy houses and things, I had the same attitude as a lot of people that were in an upper income bracket that were moving away from me. I was moving away from others. And we moved to Kalamazoo to avoid that. We moved here to get away from the bad areas and the bad neighborhoods and the gangs and the drugs and everything. And it's just ironic that we moved from what is supposedly so bad, and everyone here in Chicago, in Kalamazoo, you say, oh, Chicago, oh, that's so terrible, it's so bad. Well, my son didn't get killed in Chicago, he got killed here. And what we see on TV, it only plays a very small part, because the violence that we see now is more graphic, but it wasn't any more different than during the time that people watched all of the what so-called gangster movies. You know, I mean, what could have been more detrimental to a young person's mind than watching St. Valentine's Day Massacre? and all of the other things that we grew up with, all of the shoot-em-ups, as they called all the Westerns. Those were the same violence. It was the same thing, where people would ride into town and one man would take over a town and do this and do that. So it wasn't that these things were, we lived in la-la land way back then, and now we're so faced with such harshness. It's the uncaring and the unfeeling and the unthinking that goes into that now. Because my children didn't grow up in a household that, you know, you just disregarded human life. And I'm pretty sure even the people that have done some of the shootings, they grew up because just about every person that has shot and killed one of our children up here, they probably had parents that were really nice people and tried to do all that they could for them, but somewhere along the line, the glamour of the life, not the glamour from TV, but the glamour from the street life in itself. Because people don't look at a man that gets up and goes to work as being a hero. A man that does a 9 to 5 or a man that does a 15-hour day. He's not a hero because he's a fool. You know, you work this hard and you don't have anything to show for it. The hero is the person that can lay down and sleep until 2 in the afternoon and get out and stand on the corner and try to flag someone down and sell some rocks, and then all of a sudden before nightfall have a little wad of money in their pocket and buy some stupid tennis shoes, and now all of a sudden he's a hero. You know, and when my son got killed, he had some money in his pocket, and it was supposedly such a large nature that it should have been just, you know, when my son was fighting for his life, the police officer says, well, did you know that your son had a substantial amount of money in his pocket? You know, and so I'm thinking that he had thousands and thousands of dollars in his pocket. Well, he turned out that he had $700. Well, whoop-de-doo, you know, $700 is not a undisclosed, some big large sum of money. He had a beeper. Well, my husband had a beeper, and a lot of people have beepers, but my husband never dealt drugs. And a lot of people that have beepers and cellular phones are not people that do these things, but this is what they try to make. So therefore, when you do catch the person that killed your child's image is so tarnished that it seems like, well, he should have been killed because he was so terrible. So as far as the media being a person or a segment of our life that shows so much hardness and so much insensitivity and everything, I don't think so. I think that it only plays a small part. It only plays a very small part.
The people don't have the plane to get the stuff in here. It don't grow here. It don't, you know, you don't plant it here. It comes from out of state. They don't have the plane, the boat. They don't have the money to get it. Where is it coming from? You know where is it coming from. That's where they need to stop it at. Right there, and then you won't have it here.
That's right.
Because these kids can't afford to get it. You know, they don't have the plane or the boat or the money to go out there and get it.
My sons and their sons were, I didn't know her son, but I knew Jesse's son. And they were not in a gang. They were just 3, 4, 5 boys getting together, being out. They were doing things just like other kids did. And I think that sometimes that the media takes it and they try to make it that they were doing things that they weren't doing, and they want to, and the way I feel about it is like this. By the time the person gets caught that killed my son, you will have tarnished and made my son look like he was a person that was just an accident waiting to happen, that he was living such a degenerative type of life that he was going to be killed, if not by this person, by that. And that is not even true. That is not even what the situation was or the case, because I think what happens is that young people take too much in their own hands. They think that it's okay to settle scores, but they don't settle scores the way that they settled them 25, 30 years ago. You know, it takes more courage to settle a score, to stand flat-footed looking in your face, and if you hit me, I hit you back, and whatever, rather than I wait and hide and get a gun and then take your life, because it doesn't take courage to shoot someone.
I think it's a coward way.
It is.
Well, thank all of you for your comments and everything you shared. This concludes the first segment of our program. We'd like to thank the guests and at the same time note your compassion for the stories that you shared here today. They've been so courageous to even share these with us. I think everybody here would agree.
You have statistics? No. This is Chairman Anthony Douglas, Sheriff's Department.
He's not ready. He's not ready.
Good evening. My name is Umar Abdul Mutakalim, and I will serve as your moderator for the second session. Hopefully many of you were around for the first session and you obviously know why you are here. I am going to let you introduce yourselves, and therefore after you have introduced yourselves, I'm going to give each of you approximately 5 minutes to explain not only your position, but perhaps your philosophy, where you're coming from on this particular subject of violence in our community. I'd like to begin with the judge.
Thank you. I'm Carolyn Williams. I'm the Chief Judge of the Probate Court. I sit primarily in the juvenile division of that court.
And I'm Captain Sherman Amphy of the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Department, in charge of our Uniformed Services Division.
I'm Janet Jones. I coordinate the efforts of the Kalamazoo Coalition for Youth Violence Prevention and work with the Kalamazoo Youth Commission.
I'm Paul Bridenstine. I'm an assistant prosecuting attorney here in Kalamazoo County, assigned to the Felony Trial Division downtown.
And I'm Beverly Moore. I'm director of the Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnic Relations at Western Michigan University.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like each of you to give you a brief moment to kind of think about what we're talking about here in terms of violence in our community. We've had the parents of victims on here before. They sat there and they made several statements which were somewhat interesting. Trying to give you some time here, if you haven't got your thoughts formulated, to think about some of the statements that were made. They made statements that murder seems to be okay now, that in many cases the children, the victims themselves, are portrayed as having a quote-unquote dark side to them. In other words, that somehow, some way, the victims themselves were supposed to be victims. We've also heard that heroes today are not what they used to be. In other words, that the hero is a person who can sleep till 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, get up, sell his sufficient number of crack rocks, and have a wad of money in his pocket. On these particular issues that are impacting us so heavily today, I'd like to begin with our law enforcement representative.
Thank you. Community involvement. And you mentioned violence. In law enforcement over the years, we've seen kind of a revolution of violence, more violent in our younger people. Many years ago, we would go out in the streets and contact the young teenagers, and they would respect the police officers. There would actually be respect, and maybe even a little bit of fear. Now we find very little of that, very little respect, very little fear that you are a police officer and for what you do and what you stand for. And I don't know where that comes from or why it is now. Many of it is, I think, because of our violent society. Many of it is the movies and just our society. We've learned to accept that people are going to die. So many people each year are going to be shot or murdered. We accept that. To me, that's not acceptable. We have to do something in our communities. Law enforcement goes into a community, we answer calls, we go to various types of calls, burglaries, robberies, rapes, narcotics complaints, just the normal nuisance complaints. We found that in many cases now, families, parents are not taking the responsibility that they should take. The parents themselves are saying to our police officers, do something with my child. I cannot control this child. I can't make them mind any longer. So what we see is the police officer now trying to take the role of the parent and discipline the children, where we can't do that. Okay. There's many times no crimes committed.
Judge Williams, can you dovetail into that particular situation? After he's tried to be the surrogate parent, where's your role?
Well, first I should give a brief explanation of what the juvenile court's jurisdiction is. We are responsible for 3 principal areas. The first is delinquent conduct on the part of persons under the age of 17. Delinquent conduct can be both criminal offenses, that is any act of murder, robbery, rape, anything that is defined as a crime for an adult, or those acts that are called status offenses, those things like school truancy, home or school incorrigibility, and so on. Then we are also responsible for, and the greatest bulk of our work involves children who are abused or neglected. Children under the age of 18 whose parents are unable or unwilling to meet the responsibilities of providing proper food, clothing, shelter, medical care, a fit home or environment for the child. And the third area of our responsibility are adoptions. One of the things that I know when I get a case that has an abuse or neglect allegation and the evidence establishes that the child has been abused or neglected because of the parent's conduct is the common denominator seems to be that a parent is unready for the responsibility of parenting when they have a child. And if you note, most of the people who were here in the earlier segment had children who were victims of an offense committed by someone older than they were. So far we can tell that the perpetrators of the murders and the violence were not necessarily juveniles, but were people over the age of 17. I would argue that those people who committed those crimes were at some point victims of violence, abuse, or neglect at an earlier time when they were growing up, to have them lose a sense of self-control, a sense of empathy for other people, a sense of how to manage their own relationships with people in a non-violent way. And the only way you learn those things is by having proper parenting from the minute you slip out of the womb. Somebody who has you has to know how to take care of you, how to nurture you, how to guide you, how to protect you from the instant you are born. And until we decide as a community that we are going to make parenting instruction a component of what the community provides to children, we are going to have the pattern that we've heard about repeated over and over and over.
Thank you very much. The point that you're making is very important in terms of the relationship between abuse and violence among offenders. I'd like to turn over here to our race relations representative. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And does it all relate to race or ethnics in Kalamazoo or America overall?
Well, I feel that I wanted to go beyond what Carolyn was saying, and I'll dove right into that. I think we still look at we don't go downstream or upstream. We still look at the problem rather than the cause. And I would say, we hear a lot about the parents or the young parents. As Carolyn was talking, I was thinking that it's why are the parents that way? I think it has a lot to do with society, and it does have to do with the oppressiveness in society, the way people treat one another, and respect, or the lack of respect that exists in the whole world, as far as I'm concerned. In Kalamazoo, I think some people feel that society doesn't care about them. And we have lots of people in Kalamazoo who mouth the words. But we don't have those same people. They're willing to put their dollars toward some programs. I'm particularly concerned about government, because government sees its job as bricks and mortar and not so much dealing with the human resources or the human capital.
Can you directly relate that to what those parents were expressing here. I suppose if I were a political commentator, I would say that that sounds very sweet, very kind, but I know at least two of the parents of one of the convicted murderers. In this particular case, it's kind of hard for me to say that word since I know the parents. Excellent people. There were no financial problems. Pillars of the community. Perhaps, if any fault, maybe they gave their sons too much. But how does that play out in that particular relationship?
I'm not quite sure I understand.
In other words, is there anything that government could have done to relieve those parents of their responsibility, or the young men of the responsibility for gunning down those people?
Well, I think it's not just government. I think it's a collaborative thing. I think it takes everyone in the community doing his or her part, or each group's part. I'm gonna go back to the sweetness part. If you want to equate that to having concern or caring, I think we need a little more of that, and maybe we need a little more sweetness amongst ourselves. So I'm going to take umbrage at your comment at something being of sweetness, because
when I said sweetness, I meant it in a political commentary type sense. In other words, we would say that you would perhaps be coming from a liberal point of view versus a conservative point of view.
Well, I may be, and that I don't apologize for either. Okay. Because that's what makes the world go round, is that we have people with differing points of view. The point is, and we should have differing points of view, otherwise we don't grow. Where we need to go further is to listen and hear each other. And that's part of what you asked me about what I'm doing at Western. One of my responsibilities is to provide opportunities for people to come together and to hear each other, not just listen to each other.
So it's a communication problem as much as anything?
I think it very much is a communication problem.
Okay, let's hear from another point of view, or perhaps the same point of view. Flip a coin, whichever one.
Go ahead.
I'm a psychologist, and I'm likely to give that kind of an orientation. I've been a psychologist for 25 years, for 20 of those years specializing in behavior problems, and for the last 10 with a particular focus on very violent people. I'm going to give you a little bit of a reflection of what I think is true about people, and that is that we try to find a reason for what happens in this world. I listened very closely to a couple of the family members in the last segment talk about the way in which their deceased children were portrayed as having perhaps somehow deserved what happened to them. I think it is a human characteristic to want to make sense from things, that somehow what happens to us is because of something we could have controlled. I think it's also part of what human beings do on the other side of things when they are guilty of doing something that's not right, to try to justify it or to come up with some reason why they did it or did not do it. Those things are conflicted with each other.
So as you're speaking to the parents now, are you saying that don't try to rationalize it, don't place blame, don't take blame?
I don't know what I would say to any individual parent unless I was actually talking to them. I'm making kind of a generality in terms of a culture, trying to pick up a little on what Beverly has said and what Carolyn has said about, and also what Sherman said about what the culture permits, or the message that a culture gives. And I would suggest that it's not a coherent message. It's not a consistent message. In fact, you can hear many messages, and sometimes they're very different messages. There are messages that say your worth is determined by how much money you have to spend. There are messages that say, we hope from parents, like all of us are, that your worth is determined by who you are and how you relate to other people and how good you are. When those messages are...
I'm going to come back that to find out if there's a dominant message that's being brought, and then lead into your particular segment and your chance. Are we ready to take that break, folks?
Mm-hmm.
Do it.
We're done. Go ahead. Nope, back in.
Back in?
Yeah.
Already?
We changed tapes.
Hey, it works for me. Is there a dominant cultural message that we're dealing with here? Is there a one cultural voice that seems to be dominating over others? Many of the parents were talking about consistently that the value of life, the value of lifestyle seems to have degenerated over the course of years. And much as we saw, I guess I can't say that and be nice, much as we heard perhaps last week that there's a time that we can go back to, if we just turn back the clock, we could go back to a time when all of this did not happen.
I wouldn't necessarily say that there is a dominant message or that people feel that the nostalgia for an era that probably did not exist would be that dominant message. It has more to do perhaps with feeling things in a very personal way. We don't feel ourselves as part of a larger something as much perhaps as we used to.
We don't view ourselves as global individuals as much as we do community individuals?
Or we think of ourselves as individuals, period, before we think of ourselves as a member of a community or group. Carol?
Well, I just want to make one comment, and then I know that Mr. Bridenstine hasn't had an opportunity yet to say anything. One of the things that I think that is different from the past is an earlier loss of innocence for children, that they have an opportunity to see and hear too much about too many things that, at least when I was young, I never had any information about. I didn't get to see the very graphic depiction of sex or hear the very graphic depiction of sex or the very graphic use of profanity for no purpose whatsoever that I have heard blasted out of radio, sex and violence blasted out of radio recordings that you can hear a block away going down the street. 2 and 3 and 4 and 10-year-old kids don't need to hear that stuff, but they're bombarded with it all the time, and they can see it if they go into any video store. I'm very appalled about the fact that children who are too young to have an ability to analyze this and to process it and to put it in perspective get to see this stuff. So I have boycotted movies for years because I hate everything, but that's another story. Mr. Bridenstine.
The prosecutor's office employs 4 full-time people down in Judge Williams' court in that building to prosecute cases of individuals under the age of 17. That's 4 full-time experienced prosecutors with support staff. Then there's those individuals that are 17, 18, and 19, which are an increasing number of individuals committing criminal offenses. We pick up where Captain Ampey leaves off doing what he can do when the crime has been committed, when it now has become so serious that something must be done, whether it's at the juvenile court level in dealing with the delinquency, or if they're over the age of 16, at the adult criminal level. That soon will change due to some recent legislation, where the criminal court downtown will probably be dealing with more and more cases due to some recent legislation signed by Governor Engler, taking more of those young people coming that would normally be in front of Judge Williams, coming downtown all the way down to the age of 14.
In other words, we did a program similar to this. Go ahead and let our viewing audience know exactly what it is that you're saying. What you're saying is from the age 14 on up, they could be tried as adults.
Absolutely. They could be tried as adults, and for certain types of crimes, they will be tried as adults if they've committed those types of crimes.
I've got a question that would perhaps directly relate to your area and perhaps to the sheriff's office, but I think it's an important question to ask. One of the parents said that in terms of controlled substance, much of it is not made here. By that same token, I have a suspicion that guns aren't made here in Kalamazoo either. How do young people get guns and automatic weapons?
Well, I think maybe Captain Ampey can explain that better. I do know when I was talking with some people about wanting to bring some of the statistics, and I brought a number of them depending on where the focus is turned. Guns and criminal activity dealing with guns has risen incredibly. there was a report back of 4,000 people who were arrested, 4,000 juveniles who were arrested, not here in Kalamazoo, but in major cities, and 40% of those juveniles had indicated they had been shot at. 65% of those people who were involved in drug sales, they said they had been shot at, and over 50% of those arrested said it was incredibly easy to acquire illegal firearms. Now these are major cities around the community, and of those people who spoke as part of this study by the National Institute on Justice, the juveniles rang out with the common theme that shooting someone who shows disrespect is acceptable. So if it's possible for them to get the guns, and it's so easy for them to want to use them when it's only a sign of disrespect and nothing more, whether it be monetary or whether it be any other type of influence, if it's just disrespect, and these types of kids, because of whatever brought them to this occasion, would be willing to shoot someone, we're in for an incredibly long road to turn back the clock on that.
Causal relationship here. I'm sure that you've heard the concept of disrespect used many times. What does that mean to you? When somebody comes before you and says, this person disrespected me, okay? What does that mean to you when you hear that?
It's very difficult for me to understand what somebody, if they are, although I don't often speak to people who've been charged with crimes as they are represented, obviously, but if somebody who may have been involved in an incident who was shot at and the discussion comes up about disrespect, or at least it comes clear that that's what the discussion was, it could range from anything. It could range from the look at somebody to the walking on a particular side of the street that would not necessarily be the proper side of the street if that person was walking on. It's the slightest thing that causes someone to feel as though they've been disrespected. And I think the five of us here probably didn't grow up in an environment where those slight things were disrespectful. So it's very difficult for us to understand from a personal experience, I believe, that what it is that these young men and women feel as though is a disrespectful act, because it's not logical to think that you could do something like shoot at somebody or attack them because of the way they looked at you, because of who they were talking to, or because of where they walked. It just doesn't sound reasonable, and it's very difficult to understand.
I'd like our panel to hold that for just a second, that whole concept of disrespect. We have a member of our audience who would like to ask a question, and I'd like her to come up and ask her question.
I want to follow up on the discussion about guns, and I guess, Sheriff Anthony, you'd be a good person to ask this. There's really not anything inherently bad about guns. It's the attitude about them, from what I can see. And what do you think could be done to change the attitudes of our young people about guns, have the proper respect for them? Could we have training for them? A friend of mine in Dallas has been trying to start gun clubs for young people to teach them to have the proper respect for guns and not as weapons of destruction to go out and shoot people at will. I want to get your views on that.
Let me start off by answering the question, where do guns come from? Where do youth get guns? That was the first question. They get them in breaking and enterings. Just about every family has a gun in their home somewhere. Many of them do. It's our constitutional right, many people say, to have a gun to protect ourselves. So there are many guns in homes. Anytime there's a breaking and entering, a gun is usually stolen. That gun, therefore, is either kept by those youths who stole that or broke into that house, or sold to someone else and passed along. Breaking and enterings in gun shops, and very common, where many guns are taken. Those particular guns are sold on the street then for profit, for small profit. Those guns are again, gone from person to person on the street. So they can buy guns for $25, $50 on the street for those particular guns. That's where guns come from. Now, to answer your question about how do we get youth to respect guns, that starts in the family. The family, we have to show our kids what guns are used for. Guns are used, they're an instrument of destruction. Guns destroy things. That's what they're for. They destroy targets. What our youth see guns for, they don't see them shooting at targets. They see them in the theaters, killing people. And it's glamorized. You shoot someone, a big blood spot shows up and the person flies back, and it's glamorized and it's glory. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel big, and I'm tough and I'm strong because I have a gun and I can kill people. People have to respect me if I have a gun. That's what guns mean to young people, is I have power. I have this gun, so you have to fear me. So, excuse me, it starts back again to the family. You have to teach your kids, the children today, that guns are for a purpose to destroy. Take them to, yes, a gun club. Show them what destruction a gun can do at targets. Show them that. Make them respect the guns, that they are dangerous, that they hurt, that they destroy people and actually take lives. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Yes, I have a question. What Captain Empty was speaking about, and you say that they're getting these guns and break-ins from homes and break-ins of gun stores, but doesn't it just really honestly come down to the point of when you have Browning, who's manufacturing over 3 to 4 million guns, you have Smith & Wesson, you have Colt 45, and I mean you have gun manufacturers who are making enormous amounts of guns. I mean, mass producing these guns. Not too long ago, there was a show in defense of the United States where they were showing out in California, they were using top front loaders, dumping guns, the police department. So we can't, I don't think it's fair to say that our kids are getting these guns in break-ins and out of stores. We have to really seriously think about the manufacturing of guns, because a gunsmith doesn't manufacture guns. I mean, Iron Target doesn't make a gun. Browning makes a gun.
Can we have a response to that, if at all possible, from any of the panel members? Do you want to respond to that?
The only way I can respond to that is using an analogy. It isn't illegal to possess a gun. It isn't illegal to manufacture a gun. And the analogy would be the same as motor vehicles, of vehicles. Millions of vehicles are produced each year. Millions of accidents happen. Thousands of people lose their lives every year from automobile accidents. The answer is not stopping the manufacture of guns. It's stopping the use, the improper use of guns.
Next question.
Yes, I'm going to hit on that. They have recalls on cars. When I came in here, they said you're the big wigs. Well, I don't consider myself a big wig. I'm a normal person. So I'd like to talk to you as a normal person. I'd like each one of you, I know you can, talk to me as a normal person. Let's drop the big wigs right now. I see our children, a whole society, we're going all around the point. And the point is, we have children killing one another with no feelings. And let's not say no feelings, because somebody might have a feeling. But it's too late, because he's seen so much that glorifies the guns and murders and blood that he's going ahead and he's doing it anyway. Then we have children that are being killed in stores, you know, just shot down for revenge. I don't know where revenge comes from, because in my house when I was a little girl, if you fought with your sister and brother, the way we got punished is we had to kiss. That hurted more than anything. So I'd like to know from this panel, because psychiatrists, prosecutors, I don't know some of your other titles, but I heard about child abuse and everything, and the state likes to jump in when it's too late. I'd like to see programs set up where there's juvenile. Let's see a child, because I've heard a judge say, in my presence, several times, in my presence say, we'll wait until you get of legal age, you'll be back. Now, with those statements mean that we can see as a society that our children are hurting. That not only are they hurting, but they're hurting other people as on their way down. I'd like to also see classes in school where prayer is back. Prayer is number one. We heard a mother sit here in the middle here and say, nothing but God. And in our society, we say diminish all that, because we are a people that has the right to choose what we want. And all-time crime is going up.
Can we get a response from the panel on any of those statements?
Well, if I could
Let's start
first...
with the judge, because I think
All
she was referring to youthful offenders, perhaps repeat offenders.
Yes, and I see them all the time. And our primary effort when we see children who are very young is to try to figure out how it is we can get them to change their behavior and their decision-making process and work with their parents, provided we have parents who are responsive to that. Unfortunately, the children who have the most difficulty are children whose parents are not up to the job, shall we say. And that's when I get those children in a hearing to terminate their parental rights. I have had more termination of parental rights cases during 1996 than I did during the 10 previous years that I was a judge, because of drug use, because of violence in the home, because children are being neglected or abused in those environments. So you do not learn how to empathize or care or feel for somebody else, and therefore you are able to respond, or you are likely to respond in a violent way to any real or perceived slight. If you weren't nurtured when you were young and consistently protected and guided and parented until you reach adulthood, you're not going to know how to deal with or relate to other people. That's where I think we need to start. And I have been working very hard on a community initiative that is attempting to get to the beginning of the process and not wait till it gets to the end. And I'd be happy to speak to that some more if you'd want. So I agree that we need to do something when we know what the problem is and why children get to the point where they can take a life without a second thought.
Can someone answer this question? I'm going to blurt it out because I get kind of pushed aside because I'm really polite a lot. But when you say that there's a point where you come in at, and there's parents that don't nurture their children. We have babies being born that are mothers were on drugs and alcohol, and those babies' minds aren't together anyway, yet they come up in society and we sit back and wait.
No, ma'am, we don't. In this community, if a child is born with positive drug screen in the hospital, that child is removed from the custody of the parent immediately. And that may not be something that you know about, because we know that if a child can be properly nurtured in a safe and stable environment from infancy, the likelihood of having the damaging effects of prenatal drug exposure can be greatly reduced. So we don't wait until the child has been damaged to the extent that it is legally possible to intervene in that life.
That's not the child I'm talking about, ma'am. The child I'm talking about is the ones that I sit up here and I watch and I talk to, whose mother was on alcohol or drugs that didn't get any help, and those children are coming up more violent than others. What do we do there when we know that they're going to be a part of our system in a negative way? Those are where I would like to see intervention at right then. And you know, we don't know them until they hit the system.
That's true.
So therefore, they're a victim too, and they become a part of our society, and they victimize others. Those are the ones that I want formulas for so we can stop what's going on in this world. Those are my questions. That's my answer.
Professionally, it's very difficult for someone, for example, in my position, to do anything about a situation like that. It's a personal approach that everyone has to take, whether they have a job working for the state, whether they have the job working for a company. It's the personal approach that they will take, whether it's a program like Big Brothers Big Sisters, the Kalamazoo Academic Area Achievement Program, any of these type programs where they've already gone through some development beyond the stage in which we could go back and help nurture them, that the whole community has to get involved. When I see a child or a young man or a young woman who's 17, 18, 19 years old, who is in the courtroom sitting across from me, charged with a homicide or charged with a robbery, I can only shake my head and say, what happened at the first 18, 19 years? But professionally, I'm limited during my job to deal with that situation in the community. It's what we as a community, either through our, if we have the profession in that regard, or personally decide to do, as we talked about initially, to become an entirely community-based approach. Certain programs are going to work. People are great parents. A child is going to slip through the cracks. The community has to be there in whatever program it can develop to be there for that particular child. So it's very difficult, I think, for us as professionals to sit there and say, I'd like to take the child who is 4 years old and remove it. I can't do that unless there is some legitimate basis that has been brought before the court. So it's the community involvement that picks up the slack in the variety of ways.
We've got several other questions from callers here. One caller states that we must get down to the level of the kids and not act like bigwigs. Another question states, we'd like to know, how are friends and family members supposed to find closure to a murder when the murderer is not found? I think that's a good question for our psychologists. You know, we're talking an awful lot about the potential offenders. How about the victims? Probably there are just as many, if not more, victims than there are offenders. How do you bring closure to something like this?
Well, and this questioner was very right in pointing out that it isn't only the person who is injured or killed who is the victim of that. It is the family, it is the people who are close to that person, and in a broader way, it's all of us in our community. There are many ways people get through those. They tend to be individual ways. One way that many family members, for example, something that's helpful to them is exactly what some of these family members were doing this evening, and that is public testimony about their feelings and about that person that they have lost, keeping that person alive and having people in their lives that they can talk to about that person who is now gone so that the memory is not gone. Many family members and friends get involved in community-based programs where they feel that their loved one has not lost their life in vain or been injured in vain. Those are ways that individually families and friends deal with that.
No.
I wanted to respond to the first question.
Please do.
First comment about the bigwigs and the young people. I very much agree with that caller. First, I'd say I didn't know we were introduced as bigwigs.
I didn't do that.
But be that as it may, I agree with the caller about and communication is the thing that's most important to me. And I believe that too often we, in this case as adults, think of what we think is best, and we are adults and we should know what is best, at least how to protect our young people. But then we put programs out there, and if they don't participate in them, then we blame them.
Okay.
We say, you know, what's wrong with them? My belief is, if I can just finish this one part, is that we do not ask those for whom we're planning anything what it is they want or they feel they need or how do they feel. So I think that we don't have enough dialogue with our young people.
I have one question here that I haven't dealt with, and perhaps all of you have a perspective on this. That has to do with our correctional system. The caller asked whether or not the correctional system was effective in dealing with offenders. In other words, is it likely that any of the people who are going to be incarcerated for any of the crimes, if and when they get out, will they do it again? Let's go with the prosecutor, since you prosecute these folks. You put them away in the first place.
Unfortunately, recidivism is high.
How high?
I can't say what for Kalamazoo County incarcerated people or for statewide. That was I didn't bring that figure, so I don't know. But it is high, and it's a combination of the fact that when incarcerated, at the time they're incarcerated, they didn't learn their lesson. They're not learning any new lessons while incarcerated. They're losing contact with those individuals who they may have had a good relationship with, a loving relationship, and the people who they're being involved with over a period of time in custody or incarcerated are not doing anything to help them. So after your 5-year sentence, or 7-year sentence, or a 20-year sentence, you have lost contact with the community, you have lost contact with people whom you've loved, and you've been dealt a 20-year hand of other people who have had the same problems, lost contact with community, and there are insufficient measures within the penal system and within the correction system to address many of the problems. You could look at it as a matter of funding, as a matter of priority. You can look at it a variety of different ways. But because of the loss of contact and the failure to learn the community interaction, the positive role model steps, whatever it is that was going to get you above what it was that put you in a position to commit the crime, it's completely lost.
And they're not going to learn it in the correctional system.
The Rand Corporation conducted a study in California of the 3 Strikes We're Out program, and they were looking at it in terms of whether or not that makes us safer in the community. They found that not only does it not necessarily make us safer, that the 2 things that would make us safer, or that seem to make us safer, have to do with parenting programs, which have been alluded to time and again in this segment, and with programs that give incentives for youth to finish school. And that in fact those programs cost 1/5 of what an incarceration program costs, and they do make us safer. Does that mean we shouldn't be incarcerating people? No, not at all. There are people who are dangerous and need to be incarcerated. But in this community, in Kalamazoo, we spend 60% of our local tax money on criminal justice and public safety systems, and maybe we need to spend that much, but we spend less than 1% that much on prevention programs, and we certainly don't spend much on long-term commitments to prevention programs that start early and continue for the life of people.
Thank you. It's a really good place to kind of wind up, and right now it must wind up, but first I'd really like to thank our panel. You did an excellent job of both handling the questions and putting up with me. I'd like to thank you very much, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. If indeed we have time, do we have time for one more question? No time for one more question? Okay. Perhaps as a moderator, I noticed just before I left the house that Boy Scouts of America have a program. This year they're emphasizing Partners Against Crime, and indeed in almost all areas of our inner cities throughout the country, Scouting is trying to make a difference in that. And I'd like to emphasize that, as well as say thank you and good evening. Thank you very much.